Welcome to episode 43 of the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and today's episode is an interview with author Ray Elliot. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. From the age of 8, Ray Elliot has been on a journey to become a writer. Her love of writing and storytelling merged with her love of fantasy and science fiction with her first book, Fractured, a science fiction novel. Fractured is also available on iTunes as a podcast. Her next fiction novel will be a fantasy novel called Tree Fell, Legend of the Wood. Hello, Ray. Is there anything else you'd like people to know about you?
I am an emerging author. I love being a self-published author. It feels really good to have my books out there, and I'm really excited to get an audience and get to know my readers.
Awesome.
That's pretty much it.
That's fine. Sometimes it is all it takes. All right. So how do you feel today? Do you feel orc or elf?
I love this question. I like to think I'm feeling like, elfish, but I'm not going to lie. I always feel pretty hobbitish, too, because I'm always peckish. So
Hobbitish. That's awesome. And you're the first person I've interviewed so far who's actually gone off the two suggestions there. And I appreciate that, actually, because I don't really need it to be that answer. So people can use anything they want to there. However, I will never prompt them any other way. But hobbitish is very good because I always consider myself a bit of a hobbit.
Yes.
With orc-like tendencies, though. So,
That's good. I think it's better to be hobbitish with elf-like tendencies than maybe elfish with hobbitish tendencies.
Awesome. Okay. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your latest work?
And this you mean Fractured, right?
Any work you want to talk about here.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go into Fractured. Well, my recent work that I've published, it actually was my first book that I've published, is Fractured. And to give the my audience just a brief summary, it's basically Earth's second medieval era. There exists a tyrant king named Lo, and he abuses the power that his crown grants him. And because of that, a member of his household betrays him and transforms him into an android slave. So he now has to decide between his android state, serving this family that he was sold to, which includes a queen and a young prince seeking to liberate his people. He has to decide between helping this family or returning back to his human form.
And I have to say, I don't really do a lot of fiction anymore. I read a lot of nonfiction, but I've been listening to your podcast. I'm behind. I think I'm only on chapter 8 right now, but
Oh, that's all right.
it is fabulous.
Oh, wow, thank you. Thanks.
Can you tell me a little bit about why an android? Where did you get to that in this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, before I even thought about the setting, I was inspired to create a character who was once human, but is currently an android slave. And really, it's jarring to think about. If you were once human, fully capable, full emotions, full mental capacity, and then you're switched to a life of being forced and having no options, but still having the desire to return and the memory of your past life, how agonizing that must be. And so I thought, it would be really interesting to have a perspective, or rather a story with the perspective from that character. And so I sort of went from there.
So really the entire setting got inspired from the character in this circumstance.
Yeah, pretty much.
So how do you connect your world building back to a story?
Well, much of the world in Fractured exists the way it does because of the key issue facing Lo, the main character. For every man that holds power, some kind of power, he must decide between the power that he has ruling or the strength of his heart, rather goodness and virtue, to guide him. So the world itself is in the second medieval era because it was destroyed by powerful men who were selfish and careless, which included at the time Lo when he was a king. And throughout the story you can see evidence of the earth and its people falling further into ruin because of the current king in charge in the main city in my story, Karth. His name is King Magnus Karth. He's selfish, he's brutal, and he's careless. And his family and his people are the ones suffering the most, and you can get a big sense of that in the setting and how the people respond to their ruler.
Now, and I don't know if you do this on demand, can you give us a little bit of the Lo voice from the podcast?
Lo? You want me to do Lo?
Do a little voice for us here.
Oh, sure. All right, hold on. I gotta pull up a quote of his. No, it's true. I actually really enjoy doing the different voices for my characters. And it was really, I think one of the biggest hurdles was doing Lo, because he's an android and he's a man. So, and actually finding the moment where he starts understanding emotion versus response was a really delicate process. And that was an even bigger challenge when I started to read it out loud myself. So yeah, My lady, I do believe I am the only replica of my model left. Are you lonely, my lady, since you are the only queen in the kingdom?
Yeah, no, it's awesome, and it comes across very well when you listen to it.
So, it's so I couldn't be more of a dork trying to get into character right now.
That's awesome. Hey, this is a dork happy zone. As you're growing up, when did you have that first moment that you knew you loved world building?
Honestly, I think it was when I was actually creating my fantasy story, Treefell, Legend of the Wood, which actually was the first story I ever finished. It took me 8 years. I first started writing it when I was 16. And I mean, long before then, I was a kid when I first started love writing stories, but I'll really never forget. It was this book, Treefell, Legend of the Wood, when I realized how much I really love creating worlds. The story is a fantasy setting that takes place in a sort of primal but magical forest. I personally love the woods, and I've always had an extreme fascination with the forest. So I wanted to create a culture that lived solely by the voice or the wisdom of the wood or the forest. And every time I went for a walk in my favorite park nearby my childhood home, I found something new that really fascinated me about the world around me. And I could sense how very alive the forest was, despite how quiet it was. And that really spurred in me a thrilling story idea. So in Treefell, the world building became one of the main focuses, even more than Fractured was, I would say, because the forest in Treefell is not just a setting, but it's another character. It's rich and alive, like the forest I was inspired by growing up, and so I like to think that the reader can sense that too in this book.
Now, is that currently been self-published, or is that going to be published at a later date?
Oh, that's going to be published probably early summer of this year.
Early summer of this year. Wow, you're going to be busy this year.
Yeah. Yep, the first in the series. There's 3 books in the series, and the first one will... I'm also in the process of finding an editor. But when I do, hopefully by then the steps will move me forward to be ready by summer, hopefully.
Good luck with that. That is a key portion. I think self-publishers will have a tendency not to think about that because they do it on a limited budget.
Yeah.
If you really want your work to be at the best, you need someone skilled to help go through it with you.
That's so true.
You're this 16-year-old girl walking through inspired. How'd you know it was fantasy? Did you have a history with fantasy, or are you a token person, or did you realize it was fantasy as you're going through it?
Oh, yeah. My parents, bless their hearts, man, they read to us every night, me and my brother. And they read to us books of fantasy and the like, and it really just opened our minds to new worlds. And we read Tolkien. My mom would read to us each of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, and we just loved it. And from there on out, my brother and I were just fascinated with anything fantasy or sci-fi. And so for me, with my writing, I always was focused on like a very fantasy, sort of medieval era sort of touch, very Tolkien-esque. And I always wanted my stories to be pivotal or surrounding that sort of genre.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a name you can't forget in this process, but,
yeah.
It's the people that get us there we sometimes forget about too.
Yeah.
So what was the moment in your journey from this I believe it was 8 years old when you started writing, and 16 when you started really writing your first novel.
Yeah. Yep.
What was the journey, that moment where you said, I can publish this, I can share this with the world?
Probably last year. I never considered, well, I always dreamed, of course, I think like anyone else, seeing your book on a bookshelf. You walk in to like Barnes and Noble and there it is, and that would just be the most thrilling feeling ever. But I just thought to myself like, oh, I don't know if that'll ever happen. And I went through the traditional gatekeepers route. For about 2 years, went querying, sending letters, doing everything I could, pulling out my hair, growing back more hair so I could pull out more hair, and to try and get anyone to even read my letters. And, of course, we all know how that goes. And I felt kind of helpless, but I talked to a good friend who runs a podcast, and he encouraged me. He said, you should start a podcast for your book. That's a really open avenue. People are looking to podcasts because they have very little time to sit and read a book. And I thought, at first I was skeptical. I thought, I don't think podcasting is for me. But I did a little more research into it, and I thought, you know what? I think I'm going to do it. So I did that first. I started podcasting, and I found a fantastic audience, and I just love them all. They're so great. And from there on out, I got the confidence, some wonderful support from my family, my spouse. They just pushed me forward and said, yeah, do it. Self-published. You can do it. And I did, and I'm so grateful. I'm here today and doing pretty well. I'm, pretty happy with the success rate that I'm at. I'm not looking to be super famous, just to have someone out there read my story. That's really it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know you listen to my podcast, but, I think the thing people have to remember when they're starting down these journeys, without the consent and support, and really a lot of it from your spouse or your significant other.
Yeah.
However you view that person, you're not doing this. Especially if you have to work, and then they want to spend time with you.
Yeah.
There's all of this stuff. So it's very important to remember the spouse and thank them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love him so much. He's so patient, and he is my cheerleader. He's such a great guy. I'm so grateful.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And having them cheerlead, I think, at least for me, really helped me make it possible, because I don't think without my wife I would have even considered it.
Yeah.
I like telling stories, but, writing them down for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But when she told me they can't all come over to the house, then I was forced to write. So.
I guess you have to make totally blanking on the word here. Got to make sacrifices. There it is.
That's right. Got to make sacrifices sometimes. So what would you say is your biggest achievement to date?
Oh, honestly, there have been so many little achievements that to me are huge achievements. Because something I realized with self-publishing is baby steps are like giant steps. Reaching self-published status, was just huge on its own. Reaching 1,000 followers on Twitter, it's like, mind-blowing. I never thought that would happen. Getting blog posts repinned like crazy on Pinterest, and getting my first fan mail letter for I practically cried. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe anyone would take the time out of their day to let me know that they loved my book like that. That gave me chills. Getting subscribers, getting over 1,000 downloads on the podcast, being interviewed by fellow authors like you, Jeff. Every piece is huge to me. And I appreciate it all. So every new thing that happens is a big achievement.
Every next step. Very
yeah.
good. If you have the ability now to travel back in time to younger Ray, what real-world advice would you give her to make her journey a little easier? Or different, I'll say. I guess easier might not be the way you want. You might want it harder. I don't know.
That is a great question. Honestly, if I could find little me, first I would tell her to keep wandering around and keep dreaming. But I think I would have told myself how important it was to also be a business person, to be self-marketing savvy. And it's as important as it is to be a dreamer and a writer. A lot of people get very stuck when it comes to now marketing your book. There's sort of this feeling of, oh no, I'm an artist. I can't dirty my hands like that. And I'm sorry, but your book's not going to go anywhere with that attitude. And I was one of those people. I thought, oh no, I can't. No, my book will speak for itself. Yikes.
Yeah. I have to say, I kind of sinned in that scenario as well, too. When I first started talking, my wife is much more business focused than I am. And she sat there and she's talking about the marketing of it, and my eyes would just kind of roll in the back of my head. And I read a book from Tim Graw, Instant Bestseller, which is a wonderful book if you haven't read it.
Oh, no, I need to read that.
And I ended up taking the course from him because he finally sold me on marketing. And he's like, kind of what you're saying a little bit. And, the other part that he told me that convinced me is, that it's not about getting people to buy something they don't want. It's about finding the people and building a relationship with them.
Right. Yes.
And help and serving them relentlessly. And I'm like, okay, that I can do.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That sounds fine.
Yeah.
So I'm like you. When I get emails from people, which I always beg for, like my newsletter or whatever,
right.
Send me an email. And when I get those, it makes my whole day.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Gotta agree. But yeah, I would definitely, that would have saved me so much trouble because I learned the hard way that advertising before you even post or, before you even release your book, oh man, it's so much like if you have a corner store and you open up the doors and nobody's there. Well, if you didn't advertise your store before you opened it, then you shouldn't expect anything more than tumbleweeds. And it's the same with your book. If you're not advertising it before the gates, so to speak, are open for it, then you can't expect anyone to just go, oh wow, you're a genius with your artwork and I've heard so much about you, because nobody has, so you can't expect that.
Which might be why most artists and authors become famous after they die.
Yeah. Yep. That's Scott Fitzgerald.
There's a whole line there. Okay. So tell me a quick story about some task that could have gotten you sooner as a writer.
Yeah, kind of like I said, I think if I had just, like, especially now, because I realize now, like, even with the book that's coming out, Tree Fell, I'm going, okay, I need to get an artist for my book cover to do the cover so I can now put it on my blog page so I can start advertising it now before it comes out in June, hopefully. And I start doing the backpedaling thing before I start announcing anything. And it is awkward. It is very awkward because I keep telling myself, well, no, it's not ready yet. So, people are going to look for it and then they're going to lose interest because it won't be there, right then and there. But I got to always, fix my mind, remake my mind over and just say, no, you got to start before it's ready.
So essentially, share the process that you're going through, and the people who read it actually like that part as well.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I think I'm lost on the question.
Oh, no, that was a question. I was kind of reiterating what I thought you had said, which is basically explain the process you're going through to the people, the struggles you're going through with the people who might read your book because they'll find that interesting, and maybe they'll read your book because.
Yeah, that was one struggle definitely that I found with that. But then I think another frustrating aspect that I found with my book, especially writing Fractured, initially was finding beta readers, and someone who isn't just your friend, because your friends love you, and that's terrible. So they won't be honest with you. Unless you do have a really honest friend, then stick close to that guy, because he will tell you like it is. But yeah, no, I actually do. Actually, now that I'm rambling on and on, I do have a kind of funny story. I was finding for Treefell, I was putting out there for a friend, oh, hey, this book is out now. Let me know what you think of it. And so I sent him like the first chapter, and he mistook it for me looking for an editor at the time, and he sort of blew through it and gave me every little thing in the first chapter, and I was like, oh, dang. That's great. I love it. Thanks. But not exactly. I was just sharing it, like.
Yes. I was just trying to share.
I love what you said. It's great, but it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. And I think at the same time I was sort of cringing, like, oh, here I am thinking I'm done editing, but someone thinks there's a lot more work to be done, so I kind of had to bite my lip and go through it again.
Now is the time we start the gauntlet round.
Okay.
This is the round where I torture writers who love to use a lot of words. And I ask you to give a fast answer to all of these questions. First thing in mind kind of stuff.
Okay.
All right. So what held you back from sharing your worlds?
Shyness, thinking people wouldn't like it, basically.
Favorite types of fantasy worlds? Alien, Earth-like, or Earth-based?
Earth-based. No, Earth-like.
What is your favorite time period for fantasy settings?
Medieval-like. Somewhere around the medieval stage.
What is the most important habit or skill in creating a world?
Consistency.
What tool could you not work without?
Laptop, but I think that's kind of an obvious one.
Which I believe is the most common answer so far.
Maybe Google.
What is one resource you would offer to a world builder starting down your path?
Oh, resource. Oh my goodness. So many floating through my mind. I guess I'll just reach in and grab one. For world building, I would definitely say your podcast, and I'm not just saying that because you're featuring me on your podcast. Truly, you have such fantastic knowledge and depth and what you talk about, and for anyone looking to build a fantasy world, I direct them to you.
Awesome, I appreciate that, and now I won't have to cut that question now. No, I'm joking.
Swear you didn't pay me to say that.
Yes. If you ended up in a world you created, what would be the first thing you would do?
If it was my fantasy world, Treefell, Legend of the Wood, I would look for the specific characters that are very pivotal to the story. But I guess in regular terms, I would go hunting through the woods. If it was Fractured, I would try to get the heck out of Karth because it's a terrible city.
Avoid the king, yeah.
Avoid the king.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today, Ray. And just so the people listening, how do they find you on the internet?
You can look me up on rayelliottbooks.com. You can find my blog. It's all about writing tips and tricks and techniques for fellow writers. Also, my books are located there. You can also find me on my podcast, which is me reading Fractured, on iTunes. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm at BarelyHairBooks. I am on Facebook, Ray Elliot, and then I'm also on Pinterest as just Ray Elliot. And Amazon, also. Amazon for Fractured.
All right. On that note, go to Amazon as soon as you're done listening to this podcast.
Yes, please.
And buy Fractured. It's a good book. And also go to iTunes, rate and review Fractured, and give it a listen there too. 2 ways to consume it. You will not be disappointed.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciated this.
No problem. It was my pleasure. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardul.com to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.